The fluorescent lights above Darius Kane's head hummed with the same mechanical indifference they had displayed for the past 1,400 nights. 2:34 in the morning. The digital watch on his wrist, a $15 purchase from 3 Christmases ago, glowed faintly as he dragged the industrial mop across the marble floor of the 17th level at Harrington Capitol. The building stretched 43 stories into the Chicago skyline, a monument to wealth that never slept, though its inhabitants did. They left behind their coffee rings, their discarded presentations, their forgotten ambitions in waste paper baskets that Darius would empty before the sun crept over Lake Michigan. His shoulders carried the particular ache that comes from repetitive motion performed across years rather than hours. 35 years old, and some mornings technically afternoons given his schedule, he woke feeling twice that. The mop handle had worn smooth under his palms, the wood grain polished by 4 years of friction. 4 years of being invisible. 4 years of existing in the margins of other people's success stories. The 17th floor housed the client relations department. During daylight hours, 26 professionals occupied the space managing portfolios worth more money than Darius would see in 10 lifetimes. Their desks gleamed with the kind of order that suggested assistance and systems mechanisms of efficiency that rendered chaos obsolete. Darius knew their routines without knowing their names. The woman in the corner office arrived at 6:45 every morning, always carrying the same leather briefcase. The young man by the windows left protein bar wrappers in his trash can with mathematical regularity. The redhead 3 rows back kept a photograph of 2 golden retrievers angled toward her monitor, positioned so she could glance at it between emails. He had studied them all the way a ghost might study the living. Not out of envy, though, that lived in him too buried deep, where he tried not to examine it, but out of necessity. Understanding their patterns meant understanding how to move through their world without disturbing it, how to clean around their professional lives without ever touching them. 6 hours ago, Darius had stood in a different kind of fluorescent lighting, the harsh emergency room variety that turns every face into a study of exhaustion. Isaiah had been struggling to breathe his small chest, working too hard, the familiar whistle in his lungs that always preceded the truly bad attacks. 8 years old and already too acquainted with the limits of his own body. The inhaler had run dry that morning, yesterday morning, technically since the clock had rolled past midnight while they waited, and Darius had watched his son's lips take on that greyish tinge that sent ice through every parent's veins. The doctor, a woman young enough to still have optimism in her eyes, had administered a nebulizer treatment. She'd spoken in that careful tone medical professionals reserve for delivering news about money. He needs the prescription strength inhaler. The over-the-counter versions aren't sufficient for asthma this persistent. Darius had nodded, already calculating. The prescription would cost $240 without insurance. He made that in roughly 3.5 nights of work before taxes and before the rent that consumed most of his paycheck like a hungry thing that could never quite be satisfied. The math was simple and devastating. "I'll get it," he'd said, because what else could a father say? Isaiah had looked up at him with those eyes that saw too much, that held understanding no 8-year-old should possess. His mother's eyes, dark and luminous, the only physical inheritance from a woman 4 years gone. Sarah had been driving home from her sister's house when the truck ran the red light. The police had told Darius she died instantly, as if that information might provide comfort. It hadn't. Instant or gradual gone was gone, and Isaiah's eyes had been asking questions Darius couldn't answer ever since. They'd gotten home at 9:30, Isaiah moving slowly, the medication making him drowsy. Darius had made him toast with peanut butter, watched him eat half of it, then carried him to bed, even though he was getting too big for that. The boy's breathing had evened out the rattle in his chest, reduced to a manageable wheeze. Darius had sat on the edge of the narrow bed in their smaller bedroom, waiting until sleep pulled Isaiah under completely, before allowing himself to feel the weight of the night. Then he'd changed into his work uniform and walked the 11 blocks to Harrington Capitol, arriving at 9:58 for his 10 o'clock shift. Now mopping the 17th floor while the city slept, Darius felt the folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket, like a physical presence. Isaiah had slipped it there while Darius was getting ready for work the way he always did. A ritual they'd developed over the years, his son's way of sending pieces of himself into his father's night. Darius never read them immediately. He saved them for moments when the weight pressed too heavily, when he needed reminding why he dragged this mop across these floors instead of sleeping like a normal person with a normal life. The wheels of the bucket squeaked as he moved toward the bulletin board near the break room. He'd emptied the trash cans on this floor 40 minutes ago, wiped down the coffee station, vacuumed the conference room where someone had spilled an entire box of crackers. Only the hallway remained, and then he could move to the 18th floor, repeat the process, work his way upward through the building until 6 in the morning, when he'd clock out and walk home in whatever weather Chicago offered. But something caught his eye as he passed the bulletin board. A piece of paper, crisp and white, pinned dead center where it couldn't be missed. The header read, "Career Opportunity," in bold letters. Darius stopped. He wasn't supposed to stop. His job was to move through these spaces like water essential, but unremarkable present, but unseen. Reading job postings belonged to the daylight people, the ones who occupied these spaces with purpose rather than necessity. Yet his feet had rooted to the floor, his eyes tracking across the text. Senior Client Relations Manager, full-time day shift, comprehensive benefits including health insurance, dental vision, 5 years minimum experience in customer service or related field, strong communication skills, problem-solving ability, grace under pressure. Day shift. The words blazed like a beacon. Day shift meant dropping Isaiah off at school in the morning. Day shift meant picking him up in the afternoon. Day shift meant being present for parent-teacher conferences and soccer games and the 1,000 small moments that built childhood. Day shift meant life happening in regular hours instead of in the stolen spaces between exhaustion and necessity. Health insurance. The second beacon almost as bright. Health insurance meant prescription inhalers without calculating which bills could wait another month. Health insurance meant doctor's appointments for maintenance instead of crisis. Health insurance meant breathing easier in more ways than one. 5 years minimum experience. Darius had 8 years at Midwest Telecommunications before Sarah died, before Isaiah needed him more than he needed a career trajectory. 8 years of de-escalating angry customers, solving problems that other representatives had kicked upstairs, turning complaints into loyalty through nothing more than listening and giving a damn. He'd been good at it. Better than good. He'd had performance reviews that praised his exceptional ability to connect with clients across all demographics, and his instinct for reading between the lines of what customers actually needed. Then Sarah died, and Isaiah needed him, and the telecommunications company had given him 6 weeks of bereavement leave that turned into 8 weeks of family leave that turned into, "We need to know if you're coming back." And Darius had looked at his 4-year-old son, having nightmares every night, and made the only choice a father could make. By the time Isaiah had stabilized enough for Darius to consider returning, 18 months had passed. 18 months was a canyon in the professional world. 18 months without employment meant questions, meant suspicion, meant recruiters glancing at his resume and seeing gaps rather than reasons. He'd applied to 47 positions before accepting that no one wanted to take a chance on someone who'd chosen fatherhood over career momentum. So he'd taken what was available. Night custodian at a building where he'd once imagined working in one of those windowed offices, doing meaningful work that mattered to more than just his paycheck. The irony had tasted bitter initially, then simply become part of the landscape. Irony required energy, and he'd needed all of his for keeping Isaiah healthy and fed and as stable as a child could be after losing his mother. Darius pulled out his phone, a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen protector he kept meaning to replace, and photographed the job posting. The camera struggled in the fluorescent lighting, rendering the text slightly blurry but readable enough. He'd look at it properly later, decide whether hope was worth the inevitable disappointment. His watch read 2:51. He'd lost 17 minutes staring at a piece of paper, and the 18th floor still waited. Darius returned to his cart, his bucket, his mop, and continued working through the building's night shift, while its day shift dreamed in their beds, unaware that someone was considering joining them. The apartment was silent when he arrived home at 6:37 in the morning. 11 blocks in October's early cold, the kind of chill that hadn't yet decided whether to be autumn or winter. Darius moved quietly through the space: living room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, checking on Isaiah with the practiced stealth of someone who'd learned to exist without waking a sleeping child. Isaiah was curled on his side, breathing steady, and even his chest rising and falling with blessed normalcy. The new inhaler sat on the nightstand, the emergency backup Darius had managed to secure by promising the pharmacist he'd return with payment by Friday. Another small debt to juggle, another weight to carry. But Isaiah was breathing, and that trumped everything else. Darius stood in the doorway watching his son sleep, this small person who'd reorganized his entire existence. 8 years old, 3rd grade, smart beyond his years in the way children become when circumstances force them to grow up faster than they should. He collected facts about space exploration and could name every planet plus their major moons. He drew elaborate maps of imaginary countries with careful attention to topography. He asked questions about his mother that Darius answered as honestly as he could, trying to keep Sarah alive in stories, even as her face grew hazier in his own memory. The apartment was small, a 2-bedroom situation that generous souls might call cozy and honest ones would label cramped. They'd moved here 3 years ago when the previous place raised the rent beyond what Darius could stretch his paycheck to cover. This one cost less, but offered less older appliances. Thinner walls, windows that rattled when wind came off the lake. But it was clean and safe, and in a school district that actually gave a damn about educating kids rather than warehousing them. Darius changed out of his work clothes, the smell of industrial cleaning solution clinging to the fabric despite repeated washings. He should sleep. His body was screaming for it, that bone-deep exhaustion that came from being awake all night performing physical labor. But his mind had latched onto the job posting, turning it over and examining it from every angle like a puzzle piece that might or might not fit. He sat down at the desk in the corner of the living room, a second-hand piece he'd bought off Craigslist for $40, and opened the laptop. Another second-hand purchase, this one from a pawn shop. The machine wheezed to life slowly, its processor probably contemporary with the Bush administration. But it worked, and working was enough. The Harrington Capital Careers page loaded eventually. The Senior Client Relations Manager position was listed there with more details than the bulletin board printout had offered. Salary range that made Darius's throat tight. Comprehensive benefits package including family coverage, professional development opportunities, performance bonuses. The application required a resume. Darius had one last updated 2 years ago when he'd briefly entertained the idea of trying again for something better. He opened the document, stared at the gap between his telecommunications work and his current position, that 4-year canyon that screamed explanation. What did you say? Took time off to parent my son through grief while managing his chronic health condition. Sounded like excuses to hiring managers looking for dedication and reliability. Chose family over career, suggested priorities that didn't align with corporate culture. Have been working as a custodian at your company for 4 years. Invited all sorts of assumptions about capability and ambition. Yet lying wasn't an option. Darius had built his life on honesty because dishonesty required keeping track of fabrications, and he was too tired for that kind of mental juggling. So he updated the resume with the truth polished but not disguised. Senior custodian at Harrington Capital 4 years. Maintained high-traffic professional environment, developed efficient systems for facility management, demonstrated reliability through perfect attendance record. Then the gap labeled clearly, family caregiving responsibilities 2018 to 2020. Then his telecommunications experience, which felt like someone else's life, now distant and almost fictional. The application had essay questions. Of course it did. Why are you interested in this position? And describe a time you turned a difficult customer interaction into a positive outcome. And what does exceptional client service mean to you? Darius stared at the cursor blinking in empty text boxes. His fingers hovered over the keys. 6:48 in the morning, and somewhere in this building's 43 floors. People were beginning to wake up, starting their normal day shift lives, preparing to occupy spaces where Darius only existed as the person who ensured their trash disappeared and their floors gleamed. He could close the laptop, forget the posting, accept that some doors had closed 4 years ago and wouldn't reopen just because he'd finally found the courage to knock. Or he could try. The rational part of his brain laid out the odds with brutal efficiency. They knew him as the janitor. The hiring panel would see his current position and make assumptions that no cover letter could fully counter. They'd wonder why someone who'd been cleaning their floors for 4 years suddenly thought he belonged in their meetings. They'd see his face because, let's be honest, in a company this white, they'd definitely see his face and add that to the calculation. They'd note the single father status, the gap in employment, the trajectory that went down instead of up, and they'd find someone less complicated. But Isaiah was sleeping 20 feet away, breathing easily because of medication they couldn't consistently afford. Isaiah, who asked questions about whether his father was happy, who wrote notes and tucked them into pockets, who deserved better than watching his dad drag himself through life on fumes and stubbornness. Darius began typing. I'm interested in this position because I understand what it means to serve people when they're at their most vulnerable. For 4 years, I've worked the night shift at Harrington Capital, and while my job title is custodial, my real work has been ensuring that your employees arrive each morning to an environment that functions seamlessly. I know every inch of this building. I know its systems and its people. I've watched your client relations team work, and I recognize something I used to do well before life required different choices. I'm applying now because my circumstances have changed, and I'm ready to bring my experience and skills back to work that directly serves others. He kept typing, answering each question with the kind of honesty that felt dangerous. Describing the telecommunications customer who'd called in fury over a billing error and left the conversation thanking him by name, so satisfied she'd written a letter to corporate. Explaining that exceptional service meant seeing past the immediate complaint to the actual need underneath it, treating people like they mattered rather than like problems to be resolved and cleared from a queue. The essay questions took 47 minutes. By the time he finished, his eyes were burning and his hands were shaking slightly from exhaustion, and adrenaline mixed in equal measure. He uploaded his resume, filled in the personal information fields, checked and rechecked everything for typos, for anything that might give them an excuse to dismiss him before even reading what he'd written. His cursor hovered over the submit button. One click. One irreversible action that would either open a door or confirm it was locked. One chance to maybe possibly change the trajectory of his life and Isaiah's. Darius reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper his son had left there. The note was on lined paper torn from Isaiah's homework notebook, the edges ragged. The handwriting was careful, the letters formed with the concentration of a child still mastering penmanship. "Dad, you deserve to smile too." 7 words. Isaiah had somehow distilled everything. The exhaustion Darius carried, the joy he'd sacrificed, the future he'd deferred into 7 words written in purple crayon, because that was what had been closest to hand. Darius stared at the note for a long moment, memorizing the shape of each letter, the slight wobble in the Y of you, the way Isaiah had drawn a small star after the period, as if sealing the message with emphasis. Then he clicked submit. The page loaded. Confirmation appeared. "Thank you for your application. A member of our hiring team will review your materials and contact you if your qualifications match our needs." The professional way of saying, "Don't hold your breath." Darius closed the laptop. The apartment was warming up as the sun rose higher, light beginning to filter through the thin curtains. He should sleep. He had to sleep. His shift started again in 15 hours and his body was already protesting the current level of exhaustion. But first he walked back to Isaiah's room, stood in the doorway again, watched his son sleep with the note still clutched in his hand. Whatever happened with the application, whether they called or didn't, whether he got an interview or a form rejection or just silence, at least he'd tried. At least when Isaiah eventually asked if his father was happy, Darius could say he was working on it. He finally collapsed into bed at 7:43, setting 3 different alarms because he couldn't afford to sleep through pickup time at school. The last thought before exhaustion claimed him was a half-formed prayer to whoever might be listening. Let something change. Please just let something change. 3 days dissolved into the routine that governed Darius's existence. Wake at 3 in the afternoon. Feed Isaiah whatever dinner looked like at that hour. Help with homework. Listen to stories about school, about the science teacher who kept a bearded dragon in the classroom, about the kid who'd gotten in trouble for bringing a pocket knife for show and tell. Make sure Isaiah took his medication, ate his vegetables, brushed his teeth. Read together for 30 minutes, currently working through a book about the Mars rovers that Isaiah had checked out from the library and renewed twice. Wait for sleep to take his son, then change into work clothes, walk 11 blocks, spend 8 hours making Harrington Capital pristine for people who'd never know his name. On Thursday afternoon, technically morning for most humans, 2:43 post-midnight for Darius, his phone buzzed while he was emptying the recycling bins on the 21st floor. He assumed it was a spam call. He got 6 of those daily robots informing him about his car's extended warranty or offering to eliminate his credit card debt. But the notification showed an email, and the sender made his hands freeze on the recycling bag. Harrington Capital Human Resources. Darius set down the bag, carefully wiped his hands on his work pants, and opened the message. Dear Mr. Kane, thank you for your application for the Senior Client Relations Manager position. We would like to invite you to interview with our hiring panel. Please reply to schedule a time next week that works for your availability. We look forward to meeting with you. He read it 3 times, checking for the catch, the hidden rejection disguised as invitation. But the words didn't change. They wanted to interview him. Actual human beings in the hiring department had looked at his application, had seen the gap, the current position, all of it, and decided he was worth a conversation. The email had arrived at 9:47 that morning, 6 hours ago by normal people's clocks. Darius should wait until a reasonable hour to respond, demonstrate that he wasn't desperately hovering over his inbox. But desperation was honest, and waiting felt like game playing he didn't have energy for. He typed out a response on his phone, professional but direct. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm available any afternoon next week. Monday would be my preference if that works for your schedule, but I can accommodate whatever time is most convenient. Sent. No taking it back now. The recycling bag felt heavier when he picked it up again, or maybe that was just his arms trembling slightly from adrenaline. An interview. An actual interview. He'd clear that hurdle when he reached it, but first he had to reach it, and reaching it meant preparation. By the time his shift ended at 6 that morning, Darius had formulated a plan. He'd need to borrow a suit. His old interview outfit from his telecommunications days no longer fit stress, and night shift eating had redistributed his weight in unfortunate ways, and buying new wasn't an option. Pastor Williams at the church 3 blocks over kept a small clothing closet for congregation members in need. Darius had attended services there sporadically over the years, primarily because Isaiah liked the youth group, and the pastor never pressured anyone about attendance or tithing. He could ask. The worst Pastor Williams could say was no. He'd need to prepare answers to obvious questions: the gap in employment, the current position, why this role, why now, why should they take a chance on someone who'd been invisible to them for 4 years. He'd need to look them in the eye and explain his life without sounding like he was making excuses, convey competence without arrogance, demonstrate ambition without threatening whatever assumptions they'd already formed. The response came while Darius was walking home, his breath forming small clouds in the October morning air. Monday at 2 p.m. works perfectly. The interview will be held in Conference Room B on the 21st floor with our hiring panel. Please arrive 15 minutes early to complete some brief paperwork. We look forward to meeting you. 2 p.m. on Monday, 5 days away. 5 days to prepare to practice to transform himself from the person who cleaned their offices into someone they might consider hiring to occupy one. Isaiah was still asleep when Darius got home. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and began researching. Interview questions for client relations positions. Common mistakes candidates made. How to address employment gaps without sounding defensive. How to pivot from service work to professional roles. The internet offered endless advice, much of it contradictory, all of it assuming a baseline privilege that didn't account for being black and poor and trying to climb upward through a system designed to keep you exactly where you started. But some of the advice felt useful. Practice answers out loud. Research the company thoroughly. Prepare questions to ask them. Good candidates interview the company as much as the company interviews them. Bring copies of your resume, even though they already have it. Dress one level above the position. Show enthusiasm, but not desperation. Be yourself, except for all the parts of yourself that might make them uncomfortable. Darius created a document with potential questions and his answers. He timed himself speaking them aloud, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Isaiah. He felt ridiculous talking to an empty kitchen, but ridiculous was better than unprepared. Saturday afternoon, he walked to Pastor Williams's church. The building was old brick, the kind of structure that had probably housed 3 different congregations over its lifetime, each one adapting the space to fit their particular needs and resources. The pastor was in his office door open, working on what looked like Sunday's sermon. Pastor Williams glanced up when Darius knocked on the doorframe. He was in his 60s, white hair and dark skin, and eyes that had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by nothing, while still maintaining hope. "Darius, good to see you. Isaiah doing okay?" "He's good, getting stronger." "Glad to hear it. What brings you by?" Darius explained about the interview, about needing professional clothes he didn't possess. Pastor Williams listened without interrupting, then stood and led him down a hallway to a room that smelled of mothballs and fabric softener. "Clothing closet. We keep suits for exactly this kind of situation. Let's see what fits." They found a charcoal grey suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders and required a belt cinched tight to keep the pants from sliding, but it was clean and pressed and professional. Pastor Williams also produced a white dress shirt and a tie with thin navy stripes. "Keep them as long as you need. And Darius," the pastor's voice carried weight without judgment, "you're going to do fine. I've watched you parent that boy with more grace than most people manage with full support systems and twice your resources. If they're smart, they'll see what you're capable of." Darius carried the suit home like it was made of something more valuable than fabric and thread. It represented possibility, the physical manifestation of a door that might actually open instead of remaining permanently locked. Sunday evening, his night off from the custodial shift, he sat Isaiah down for a conversation they should have had earlier, but Darius had been avoiding in case nothing came of the application. "Buddy, I need to tell you something. I have a job interview tomorrow." Isaiah looked up from the Lego spaceship he was constructing, his face shifting through surprise to something more complex. "A different job than now?" "Same company, different position. If I get it, I'd work during the day instead of at night. That means I could take you to school every morning and pick you up every afternoon." Isaiah's hands stilled on the Legos. "And you'd be home at night?" "Every night. For dinner, homework, bedtime. All of it." "Will you get it?" The question held weight beyond its 4 words. Isaiah had learned early not to invest too heavily in hope to protect himself against disappointment by maintaining careful emotional distance. Darius hated that his son had developed that particular survival skill before turning 9. "I don't know, buddy. I'm going to try my best. But even if I don't get it, I want you to know I'm trying. Things don't always work out the way we hope, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." Isaiah nodded slowly, processing this information with his characteristic seriousness. Then he got up, walked to his backpack, and pulled out a piece of paper and his pencil case. He wrote something Darius couldn't see, what folded the paper into a small square, and brought it over. For tomorrow. Don't read it until after. Darius took the paper, recognizing the ritual, the way Isaiah tried to send pieces of his love and hope into moments he couldn't physically be present for. Thank you, buddy. Dad. Isaiah's voice was small. Even if you don't get it, you're still the best dad. Something cracked in Darius's chest, that fault line that had been forming since Sarah died, and he'd become simultaneously mother and father, provider and nurturer, the only parent standing between his son and a world that wasn't particularly interested in making things easy for either of them. You're the best kid, that's for sure. They finished the Lego spaceship together, then watched a documentary about the International Space Station that Isaiah had been waiting all week to see. Normal evening, normal routine, normal life, with the weight of tomorrow's possibility hanging over it like weather that hadn't yet decided whether to be storm or sunshine. Monday arrived with grey skies and temperatures that had finally committed to autumn. Darius woke at 11, earlier than usual, his body protesting the disrupted schedule. He showered, shaved carefully, put on the borrowed suit, and studied himself in the bathroom mirror. The clothes transformed him into someone else, or maybe just revealed a version of himself he'd packed away 4 years ago. Professional. Capable. Someone who belonged in meetings instead of mopping floors. Isaiah was at school. Darius had arranged with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher who sometimes watched Isaiah when schedules got complicated, to pick him up that afternoon. One less thing to juggle, one less potential crisis, if the interview ran long. He arrived at Harrington Capital at 1:43, 17 minutes early. The building looked different in daylight, the glass and steel reflecting blue sky instead of absorbing darkness. People moved through the lobby with purpose, briefcases and laptops, and the confident stride of those who belonged. Darius had walked through this space thousands of times, but always at night, always invisible. Now he was walking in as someone they might see. Security recognized him. Marcus, one of the day shift guards, did a double take. Darius, man, almost didn't recognize you. Looking sharp. Got an interview upstairs. Marcus's eyebrows rose. No kidding, good for you, man. Good luck. The elevator required a key card for floors above 15. Darius still had his custodial access card, which worked on every floor since cleaning staff needed universal access. He swiped it, pressed 21, and rode up while his heart performed gymnastics in his chest. The 21st floor looked different with people occupying it. Desks that he knew as empty dark spaces were alive with activity phones, ringing keyboards, clicking conversations happening in that specific tone of professional focus. Several heads turned when he stepped off the elevator. A few faces showed recognition that didn't quite connect, that familiar sensation of knowing someone without being able to place them. Darius had cleaned their offices, emptied their trash, existed in their peripheral vision, but never like this. Never as someone who might sit among them. He found Conference Room B, a glass-walled space currently empty. Human Resources was 3 doors down. The receptionist looked up when he approached her, smile professional and warm. Here for an interview? Yes, Darius Kane, 2 o'clock appointment. She handed him a clipboard with forms. Just some standard paperwork. Bring it back when you're done, and I'll let the panel know you're ready. The forms asked for contact information. He'd already provided emergency contacts authorization for background checks. Standard stuff, except the background check authorization made his hands go cold. What would they find? Nothing criminal. He'd never even gotten a speeding ticket. But would they dig deep enough to see the financial struggles, the eviction he'd barely avoided 2 years ago? The medical bills in collections from Isaiah's emergency room visits? Would they look at his credit score and decide someone that poor couldn't possibly handle wealthy clients' accounts? He completed the forms anyway, signed and dated everything, returned them to the receptionist. She smiled again, gestured to the chairs lining the wall. They'll come get you in just a few minutes. Darius sat. The chairs were the expensive kind leather that actually breathed, instead of making you sweat, ergonomically designed for comfort during long waits. He tried to project calm confidence, the demeanor of someone who interviewed for professional positions regularly and wasn't terrified of blowing this opportunity. The folded paper in his inside jacket pocket felt warm against his chest. He wanted to read it to draw strength from whatever Isaiah had written, but he'd promised not to until after. So he sat with it there, a talisman or a promise or both, and waited. At precisely 2 o'clock, 3 people emerged from a nearby office. The woman in front was perhaps late 30s, blonde hair, pulled-back navy suit, and sensible heels, carrying a leather portfolio. Behind her came a younger man, maybe late 20s, expensive haircut, and equally expensive watch, his attention on a tablet in his hands. And leading them, looking like he owned not just the company, but the entire concept of corporate authority, was a man in his 50s with steel grey hair, a suit that probably cost more than Darius made in 2 months, and eyes that assessed everything with practiced calculation. The older man spotted Darius, and his expression flickered just for a second, barely perceptible through recognition and something else. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. The kind of micro-expression that spoke volumes about assumptions being recalibrated in real time. Mr. Kane. His voice was smooth-cultured, the kind of accent that came from expensive education and deliberate elocution practice. Lawrence Whitfield, Vice President of Human Resources. This is Rebecca Thornton, our hiring manager for the Client Relations Department, and Jeffrey Martinez from my team. Thank you for coming in. They all shook hands. Lawrence's grip was firm to the point of aggressive, a dominance play disguised as professionalism. Rebecca's handshake was warmer, her eyes actually meeting his with what looked like genuine interest. Jeffrey barely glanced up from his tablet. Right this way. They led him into conference room B. The table was long polished wood that reflected the overhead lights. 3 chairs on one side, 1 on the other. The interview chair faced the windows, which meant the panel would be backlit, their expressions harder to read while everything about Darius would be clearly visible. Power dynamics established before a word was spoken. Darius sat. Rebecca arranged papers in front of her. Jeffrey continued communing with his tablet. Lawrence settled into his chair with the careful positioning of someone who knew exactly how much space he deserved to take up. So, Lawrence folded his hands on the table, that practiced gesture of someone about to ask important questions. Mr. Kane, you've submitted an impressive application. Walk us through your background, particularly the rather significant transition from telecommunications to your current role. And there it was. Not, tell us about yourself, or what interests you about this position. Straight to the gap, the trajectory that went down instead of up, the thing that needed explaining, because people weren't supposed to move from professional work to custodial labor unless something was deeply wrong. Darius had practiced this answer. He'd stood in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, running through different versions, trying to find the balance between honesty and strategic presentation. Now, sitting across from 3 people who would decide whether he got a chance or another rejection, the practiced words felt hollow. So he told them the truth instead. My wife died 4 years ago. Car accident. Our son was 4 at the time. He needed his father more than he needed me to maintain a career trajectory. So I took leave then, more leave, and eventually I had to choose between being present for my son during the hardest time of his life or keeping a job that didn't care what I was going through. I chose my son. When I was ready to return to work, the market had moved on, but I still needed to support my family, and I needed flexibility to be there when my son needed me. Night custodian at Harrington offered both. It's honest work, it pays our bills, and it let me be the father Isaiah needed me to be. Silence stretched across the table. Rebecca's expression had softened. Jeffrey had actually looked up from his tablet. Lawrence's face remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes had sharpened. I see. And your son, he still requires this flexibility. The emphasis on the last word carried judgment, as if flexibility was code for unreliability. My son has chronic asthma. He needs regular medical care and a parent who can respond when emergencies happen. But I'm not asking for special accommodations. I'm asking for the opportunity to do work I'm qualified for during hours that let me be both an effective employee and a present father. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Your telecommunications experience is strong. 8 years with Midwest Tel. I noticed several commendations in your file. Can you tell us about your approach to difficult customer situations? Finally, a question about competence instead of circumstances. Darius relaxed fractionally and talked about active listening, about de-escalation techniques, about the importance of treating customers like people rather than problems to solve. Rebecca asked follow-up questions, good ones that demonstrated she was actually listening and evaluating his capabilities. But Lawrence kept circling back to doubts disguised as concerns. Mr. Kane, our culture here is quite demanding. We expect complete dedication from our client relations team. Long hours, sometimes high-pressure situations, clients who can be challenging. Do you believe your personal circumstances would allow you to meet those expectations? The word culture hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire Darius couldn't see but could definitely smell. He'd heard it before, that particular term, wielded like a weapon dressed in professional language. Culture fit, cultural alignment, our culture demands, code words that meant you're not like us, you don't belong here, we can already see you failing before you've even started. Darius met Lawrence's gaze, directly refusing to look away first. I've been working at this company for 4 years. I know your culture. I've seen how your employees work, what they value, how they treat each other. I've also spent 8 years managing some of the most demanding customers in telecommunications, people calling at their breaking point because their service failed during critical moments. I understand pressure. I understand dedication. What I'm asking for is the chance to demonstrate that understanding in a role that actually uses my skills instead of just my ability to operate a mop. Lawrence's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rebecca was writing notes, her pen moving quickly across the legal pad in front of her. Geoffrey had returned his attention to the tablet, but his thumbs weren't moving. He was holding it like a shield present, but not participating. Tell me about a time you had to handle multiple competing priorities under time pressure. The question came from Rebecca, and Darius recognized it as a lifeline, an attempt to steer the conversation back toward competency assessment, instead of Lawrence's thinly veiled interrogation about whether a black single father could be trusted with wealthy white clients. He answered. He told them about the day at Midwest Tel when the system crashed during a snowstorm, when he'd had 67 customers in queue and a supervisor who'd disappeared to deal with upper management, when he'd spent 11 hours rotating between calls and managing the expectations of people who'd been waiting for hours and were understandably furious. He explained his prioritization system, his communication strategy, the way he'd tracked each case to ensure nothing fell through the cracks, even when everything felt like it was actively falling apart. Rebecca nodded along. Even Geoffrey seemed marginally engaged. But Lawrence kept finding new angles for doubt. Your current position, you mentioned you've worked here 4 years, as custodial staff. He let the job title sit there loaded with implications. Help me understand how someone with your background ends up in that role, and then decides 4 years later that they want to move into client-facing work. What changed? Nothing had changed except desperation had finally outweighed fear of rejection. Except Isaiah had written, "You deserve to smile too," and Darius had realized his son was watching him accept diminishment as permanent condition. Except the inhaler costs kept rising, and the bills kept multiplying, and working himself to exhaustion for poverty, wages had started feeling less like sacrifice and more like self-destruction. What changed is my son is older now, more stable. The asthma is better managed. I have more capacity to take on demanding work because I'm not in constant crisis mode. And I saw this posting and recognized that I used to be good at exactly this kind of work. I'm still good at it. The skills don't disappear just because circumstances force you into different roles temporarily. 4 years is quite temporary. Lawrence's voice carried something sharp beneath its professional veneer. Darius felt the interview slipping away from him, felt the decision being made in real time, regardless of how well he answered or what qualifications he brought. This man had already decided who Darius was: janitor, single father, black man with complications, and no amount of eloquence or experience was going to change that fundamental categorization. The knowledge settled into Darius's stomach like cold stone. He could keep answering questions, keep performing this charade of evaluation, or he could acknowledge what was happening and leave with whatever dignity remained. Mr. Whitfield, Darius kept his voice level, professional, drained of the anger that wanted to color every word. Let me save us all some time. You asked what our culture demands. Your culture demands people who fit a particular image, who arrived at their careers through particular paths, who don't have complications that make you uncomfortable. I don't fit that image. My path has been rocky. And my life is complicated because I chose to prioritize being a present father over maintaining an uninterrupted resume. If those things disqualify me, then we're done here. But don't pretend it's about my qualifications or my ability to handle the work. We both know what this is actually about. Rebecca's pen had stopped moving. Geoffrey's eyes had gone wide. Lawrence's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, indignation, calculation. Mr. Kane, I think you're misunderstanding. I don't think I am. Darius stood smooth and controlled, refusing to make his exit look like retreat. Thank you for your time. Ms. Thornton, Mr. Martinez. He walked toward the door, while his heart hammered against his ribs and his hands wanted to shake, but he wouldn't let them. The borrowed suit suddenly felt like costume instead of armor. He'd gambled on honesty and lost, but at least he'd lost on his own terms, instead of subjecting himself to more politely worded rejection. The door opened under his hand. The hallway stretched ahead, populated with people moving between meetings, carrying coffee, living their professional lives in the building where Darius would return tonight to mop their floors and empty their trash and remain invisible. We'll be in touch. Lawrence's voice followed him, that automatic corporate phrase that meant the opposite of what it said. Darius didn't respond. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, waited while the numbers descended. 2 people got off when the doors opened, a man in shirt sleeves carrying a stack of file folders, a woman in a pantsuit talking intensely on her phone. They glanced at Darius the way people glance at strangers in elevators, brief acknowledgement before dismissing him as irrelevant to their day. The lobby felt different from when he'd entered an hour ago. The confidence that had carried him through the door had evaporated, replaced by the familiar weight of knowing you reached for something and had it slapped away. He'd known the odds. He'd understood rejection was likely. But knowing and experiencing were different countries, and he was currently standing in the latter feeling like a fool for hoping. The security desk was to his right. Marcus was helping someone sign in, checking their ID against a visitor log. Darius thought about saying something acknowledging the earlier well-wishes, but what would he say? Thanks for the luck, didn't need it. The decision was made before I sat down. So he aimed for the exit instead, for the glass doors that would return him to the October afternoon and the 11-block walk home where he could change out of this borrowed suit and return to his actual life. His hand was on the door handle when he heard his name. Not called casually. Shouted. Urgent and commanding enough that every person in the lobby stopped what they were doing and turned toward the source. Darius Kane. The voice belonged to a woman, and it carried the kind of authority that expected immediate attention. Darius turned slowly, trying to locate who had called him and why. She was crossing the lobby with purpose, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that suggested she was used to people getting out of her way. Late 40s, silver threading through dark hair pulled back in a style that was elegant without being fussy. Charcoal suit that fit with the precision of expensive tailoring. She moved like someone who knew exactly how much space she deserved and took it without apology. Darius recognized her face from the portraits that hung in the executive corridors on the upper floors, from the company newsletters that occasionally got left out when he was cleaning offices. Vivian Harrington, founder and CEO, the name on the building, Monley. She reached him before he could fully process what was happening, before his mind could catch up to the fact that the CEO of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars was standing 3 feet away and looking at him like she knew exactly who he was. You're leaving. Not a question. A statement that somehow managed to sound like accusation and concern simultaneously. Yes, ma'am. The interview didn't go as planned. I imagine it didn't. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in details with the kind of attention that suggested she missed very little. Walk with me. She turned and moved toward a corridor that branched off the main lobby, clearly expecting him to follow. Darius hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, confusion warring with curiosity, and the sense that refusing a direct request from the CEO would be its own kind of mistake, then followed. The corridor led to a quiet alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. She stopped there, turning to face him with an expression that was difficult to read. Mrs. Harrington, I appreciate whatever this is, but I really don't need anyone's pity. Good. The word came out crisp. Because I don't have any to give. Silence stretched between them while Darius tried to figure out what was happening. The lobby noises filtered in, distantly conversations, footsteps, the electronic chime of the elevator. But in this alcove they felt muted, like they were standing in a pocket separated from the normal flow of the building. I know who you are, Mr. Kane. Not from your application, though I've now read that too. I know you from something else entirely. Darius's mind raced through possibilities and came up empty. He'd never met this woman, had never been in a room with her, had certainly never had a conversation that would lodge him in the memory of someone whose time was valuable enough to bill at rates he couldn't imagine. I don't understand. 4 months ago, November 19th, 11:30 at night. She watched his face carefully. A young girl having an asthma attack in a conference room on the 19th floor. Do you remember? The memory surfaced slowly, pulled from the catalogue of 1,000 nights that tended to blur together. Yes, he remembered. A child, maybe 7 years old, sitting on the floor of a conference room, struggling to breathe, while a woman in a business suit panicked nearby. The woman had been trying to reach someone on her phone, nearly incoherent with fear, while the girl's lips had been taking on that greyish colour that meant she was maybe 2 minutes from a real emergency. Darius had been passing by with his cart. He'd heard the commotion. He'd assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who lived with asthma attacks and knew exactly what they looked like when they went from manageable to critical. Isaiah's emergency inhaler had been in his work bag. He always carried a backup, had learned that lesson the hard way, after an incident where his son needed medication, and Darius had been 20 minutes away with no way to help. So he'd had one on him, and the girl's symptoms had matched Isaiah's closely enough that he'd known what to do. He'd administered the inhaler. Calm voice, steady hands, the girl focusing on him while he counted breaths and talked her through it. The medication had worked quickly. It usually did when caught in time, and within 5 minutes her colour was returning, her breathing evening out. Then Vivian Harrington had burst into the room, clearly having received a panicked call from the woman who'd been watching the child. She'd been terrified, and trying not to show it, professional armour cracking under maternal fear. She'd dropped to her knees next to the girl, checking her over with shaking hands. You saved her life. Vivian's voice in the present pulled him back from the memory. No exaggeration. Natalie was in crisis and you responded immediately with exactly what she needed. I tried to thank you properly, but you left before I could. Your daughter was okay. That was thanks enough. Most people would have asked for a reward, or at least told me their name and position so I could acknowledge what they'd done. I did what any parent would do. Darius remembered that night clearly now. He'd given Vivian his name when she'd asked, but nothing else. No job title, no request for recognition. He'd finished his shift and gone home and never thought about it again because it had just been basic human decency, the kind of thing you did when someone's child needed help. Not any parent. Vivian's expression had softened slightly. My daughter is alive because you were there, and you knew what to do, and you didn't hesitate. When I asked security to find you so I could thank you properly, they told me you were a custodian on the night shift. I asked your supervisor about you. He said you were reliable, quiet, never caused problems. I kept meaning to reach out to do something to acknowledge what you'd done, but running a company has a way of consuming time. She paused. Then this afternoon I was reviewing security footage, something I do periodically since Natalie's incident, and I saw you in the elevator, coming from the 21st floor, dressed for an interview. The pieces were coming together, but Darius still couldn't quite see the complete picture. You were watching the cameras. I was in my office on the 42nd floor. I have access to all security feeds. And yes, after what happened with my daughter, I pay attention to who moves through this building and when. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen several times, then turned it to show him. Security footage, multiple angles, time-stamped 2:51 p.m. Darius exiting the elevator, walking across the lobby, reaching for the door. I called down here before you could leave. I needed to know why the man who saved my daughter's life was walking out of a job interview looking like someone had just kicked him. Darius didn't know what to say to that. The whole situation felt surreal, like he'd stepped sideways into a reality that operated on different rules than the one he'd woken up in. Vivian's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then answered with terse efficiency. Lawrence, I need you in the first floor west alcove. Now, bring your interview panel. She ended the call without waiting for a response. Mrs. Harrington. Vivian, and before you tell me this isn't necessary, let me be clear about something. Her eyes held his, and there was steel under the polished professionalism. I built this company from nothing. I spent 30 years fighting to be taken seriously in an industry that didn't want women, especially not women who didn't come from money or Ivy League connections. 28 years ago, I stood in a lobby very much like this one after an interview where someone told me I wasn't the right cultural fit for their company. They meant I wasn't part of their old boys club. I walked out with my dignity intact and my future in ruins. It took me 5 more years to get another real opportunity. She let that sit for a moment, her expression hardening. But I've watched this company for 3 decades. I've seen how people get shut out by the same coded language, culture fit. Not quite right for us. Only the reasons have nothing to do with competence and everything to do with who you are and where you came from. I saw your face when you came out of that elevator. I know that expression because I've seen it on the faces of every talented person this industry has dismissed for reasons that should be irrelevant. And I will not allow the man who saved my daughter to be treated like he doesn't deserve a chance because someone decided his circumstances make him less valuable. Footsteps approached from the main lobby. Lawrence appeared first, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with questions. Rebecca and Jeffrey trailed behind, both looking uncertain about why they'd been summoned. Lawrence's gaze moved between Vivian and Darius, calculating. Mrs. Harrington, is everything all right? That depends entirely on what you tell me in the next few minutes. Vivian's voice had shifted into something harder. Mr. Kane here just walked out of an interview for our senior client relations manager position. I'd like to understand why. We were still evaluating, Lawrence started, but Vivian cut him off with a gesture. Rebecca, how did Mr. Kane perform on the competency questions, the actual skills assessment portion of the interview? Rebecca glanced at Lawrence, then back at Vivian. Her voice was professional, but firm. Outstanding. His approach to customer relations is sophisticated, his problem-solving methodology is sound, and his experience directly translates to what we need in the role. His answers were some of the best I've heard in the 6 months I've been conducting these interviews. So the issue wasn't his qualifications? Vivian's tone made it clear this wasn't a question. Lawrence explained to me what the problem was. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Darius could see Lawrence working through options, trying to find language that would satisfy his CEO without admitting to the assumptions that had colored the entire interview. Whatever he'd been planning to say died when he met Vivian's eyes, and apparently saw something there that made dissembling seem like a bad strategy. There were concerns about reliability. His employment history shows a significant gap, and his current position doesn't necessarily indicate his current position. Vivian's voice could have cut glass. Which is custodian, on the night shift, in this building. Is that what doesn't necessarily indicate he's qualified for client relations work? His circumstances are complicated. His circumstances are that his wife died and he chose to be present for his son during a traumatic period. Those circumstances make him unreliable. How exactly? Lawrence had no answer that wouldn't sound like exactly what it was. Rebecca was studying the floor. Jeffrey had achieved some kind of transcendent stillness, probably hoping to avoid being noticed. Vivian turned to Darius, her expression shifting to something that wasn't quite sympathy, but held understanding. I know what you're feeling right now. I know you want to walk away to refuse help because accepting it feels like admitting you needed saving. I know that pride is sometimes the only thing you have left when everything else has been taken or denied. She paused, letting that land. But your son is waiting for you to come home, and you need to decide whether your pride is worth more than his future. The words hit like physical blows. Darius thought about Isaiah sitting with Mrs. Chen, probably doing homework, definitely watching the clock and counting the minutes until his father returned. Isaiah, who'd written, "You deserve to smile too," because even at 8 years old, he could see that his father had stopped fighting for anything beyond basic survival. The folded paper was still in his jacket pocket, pressed against his chest. He'd promised not to read it until after the interview, and technically this counted as after, even if nothing had gone according to any imaginable plan. He pulled out the note, unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was Isaiah's careful print purple crayon on notebook paper. Dad, no matter what happens, you're number one to me. Something shifted in Darius's chest, that tectonic movement that happens when you realize you've been carrying weight that doesn't belong to you, accepting limitations that someone else imposed and you internalized as truth. He looked up from the note. Vivian was watching him with patience that suggested she'd wait as long as necessary. Lawrence was radiating discomfort. Rebecca looked hopeful in a way that made Darius think maybe not everyone in the interview had been working against him. I'm not staying for you, he said to Vivian, his voice quiet but steady. I'm staying for him, and for myself. Because you're right. Pride is sometimes all we have, but my son deserves to see his father fight for something better instead of accepting that the world gets to define our ceiling. Vivian nodded once, a sharp gesture of acknowledgement. Then she turned to Lawrence with an expression that could freeze fire. Mr. Kane will start Monday morning as Senior Client Relations Manager. Full salary, full benefits, standard onboarding. Rebecca, you'll be his direct supervisor. Make sure he's set up for success. Jeffrey, handle the paperwork. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried weight that came from 3 decades of building something from nothing and defending it against people who'd wanted her to fail. And Lawrence, you and I will be having a conversation in my office, a long one, about culture and assumptions and what it means to work for a company I built. Lawrence's face had gone pale under its professional tan. He managed a tight, "Yes, ma'am," that suggested he understood exactly how serious that conversation was going to be. Vivian looked back at Darius. My daughter is alive because you acted without thinking about recognition or reward. You saw someone who needed help and you helped them. That's the kind of person I want representing this company to our clients. Not someone who fits a particular image, but someone who gives a damn about people. She extended her hand. Welcome to Harrington Capital, Mr. Kane. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish here. Darius shook her hand, still processing everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. An interview that had gone catastrophically wrong. A CEO who'd remembered him from a single encounter months ago. A job offer that had materialized from disaster like some kind of narrative miracle that shouldn't happen in real life. Thank you, felt inadequate, but it was all he had. Thank you. Thank me by doing excellent work and proving that my instinct was right. Vivian's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile, if smiles came with that much steel underneath. And by setting an example for the people who come after you, the ones who'll face the same assumptions and barriers. Show them that being told you don't belong is just someone else's opinion, not an actual limitation. She turned and walked back toward the main lobby, her heels clicking against marble with the same confident rhythm as before. Lawrence followed with considerably less confidence, looking like a man heading toward a reckoning he couldn't avoid. Jeffrey scurried after them, clutching his tablet like a security blanket. Rebecca remained behind. She met Darius's eyes, and there was apology there mixed with relief. I'm sorry about how that went. I should have pushed back harder during the interview. I knew what was happening, but She stopped, clearly frustrated with herself. Anyway, I'm genuinely glad you're joining the team. I meant what I said. Your answers were excellent, and I think you're going to be really good at this. Thank you for speaking up, and for... He gestured vaguely at everything that had just transpired. Come by my office tomorrow around 9. We'll do proper onboarding, get you set up with systems access, all the boring administrative stuff. Monday's your first official day, but we should get logistics handled beforehand. She paused. Do you have any questions about the role, the team, anything? Darius had approximately 8,000 questions, but most of them weren't about the job specifics. They were about whether this was really happening, whether he could trust it, whether Monday morning would arrive and somehow the offer would evaporate because someone decided it had been a mistake. But those weren't questions Rebecca could answer. I'll probably have plenty tomorrow. Right now I'm still processing. Fair enough. She smiled, genuine warmth in it. Seriously though, welcome aboard. I think you're going to fit in great with the team. The actual team, not whatever Lawrence was worried about. She headed back toward the elevators, leaving Darius alone in the alcove with floor-to-ceiling windows showing Chicago under October grey skies. The city looked the same as it had an hour ago when he'd walked into this building with borrowed clothes and practiced answers. But something fundamental had shifted. Some door had opened that he'd been told was permanently locked. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Text from Mrs. Chen. Isaiah doing homework. Says to tell you he believes in you. Darius read the message 3 times. His son, 8 years old, and already too familiar with disappointment and making do with not enough, had told his neighbor to send that specific message. Had chosen those specific words. I believe in you. Past tense rejected, present tense hope. He typed back, tell him I got the job, and tell him thank you for the note. The response came quickly. He's very excited, jumping around the living room. I'll keep him here until you get home. Darius walked through the lobby in a daze. People moved around him with their normal afternoon purpose, unaware that his entire trajectory had just changed. Marcus at the security desk caught his eye and gave him a questioning thumbs up. Darius returned it with a real smile, the first one that had felt natural in he couldn't remember how long. The October air hit cold when he stepped outside, but he barely felt it. 11 blocks home. 11 blocks to tell Isaiah that things were going to be different now. Better. Not perfect life never gave perfect to people like them, but better. Day shift meant regular hours. Benefits meant healthcare without choosing which bills to postpone. A real salary meant maybe building a small cushion instead of living one emergency away from catastrophe. He walked faster, suddenly needing to see his son to share this impossible good news with the one person who deserved to hear it first. The borrowed suit jacket flapped open in the wind. His dress shoes weren't designed for Chicago sidewalks, and his feet would probably hurt tomorrow. None of it mattered. 4 years of pushing a mop through this building at night. 4 years of being invisible, of existing in margins, of telling himself that accepting less was necessary survival strategy. 4 years of watching his son grow up in snatches between exhaustion and financial stress and the grinding weight of knowing he could do better if only someone would let him. And then a CEO had watched security footage and remembered a night 4 months ago when Darius had just done what needed doing, when he'd helped a child who needed help without calculating what he might get in return. Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't opportunity knocking, it's someone deciding to fling the door open because they remember when doors were slammed in their own face. Darius reached Mrs. Chen's apartment building 6 blocks from his own. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering from exertion and anticipation and the leftover adrenaline of the last hour. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock her face already arranged in a smile. He's been watching the clock since I told him about your text. Isaiah appeared behind her eyes, huge with questions he was trying not to ask too loudly in case the answers disappointed. Darius knelt down to his son's level and pulled him into a hug that probably squeezed too tight, but he couldn't help it. I got it, buddy. I start Monday. Isaiah pulled back just far enough to search his father's face. Really? For real? For real? Day shift benefits everything. We're going to be okay. His son's face crumpled in the way it did when emotions got too big to hold inside properly. He buried his face against Darius's shoulder, and Darius could feel him shaking, crying in the silent way kids cry when they've been holding fear in for too long, and relief finally lets it out. Thank you for believing in me, Darius whispered into his son's hair. Thank you for the note. It helped more than you know. They stayed like that while Mrs. Chen diplomatically busied herself in her kitchen, giving them space for this moment. Eventually, Isaiah pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. Does this mean you won't be tired all the time? The question stabbed through Darius's chest. His 8-year-old son had spent years watching his father operate on fumes, had normalized exhaustion as his dad's default state, and was now asking if maybe normal could include rest. Yeah, buddy. It means I won't be tired all the time. It means I can take you to school in the morning and pick you up in the afternoon. It means we can have dinner together every night. It means things are going to be better. Isaiah nodded seriously, processing this information with the gravity of someone who understood that better didn't mean perfect, but was still worth celebrating. Can we get pizza tonight to celebrate? Darius thought about his bank account, about the careful budget he maintained where every dollar had 3 different jobs, about the fact that he wouldn't actually see a paycheck from this new position for at least 2 weeks. Then he thought about his son asking for pizza. Just pizza, not a toy or a game or any of the 1,000 things kids wanted to celebrate his father finally catching a break. Yeah, we can definitely get pizza. They thanked Mrs. Chen and walked the remaining blocks home together, Isaiah's hand in his, talking about toppings and whether they could afford extra cheese and what kind of soda they should get. Normal conversation, normal evening, normal life that had been out of reach for so long. It felt like visiting a foreign country. The apartment looked the same when they got there, but somehow felt different, like possibility had crept in through the windows and rearranged the air. Darius called in the pizza order large with extra cheese and pepperoni because tonight was for celebration budget be damned. While they waited for delivery, he changed out of the borrowed suit and back into his regular clothes, carefully hanging the suit on a hanger to return to Pastor Williams tomorrow, with thanks that felt inadequate for what those clothes had witnessed. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, drawing coloured pencils scattered around him in the cheerful chaos of a child creating something. Darius stood in the doorway watching this small person who'd kept him going through 4 years of grinding survival, who'd written notes and tucked them in pockets and believed in his father even when his father had stopped believing in himself. "Hey, buddy." Isaiah looked up from his drawing. "I love you, and I promise I'm going to make you proud." "You already make me proud, Dad. You're my hero." Simple words from a child who didn't know how to be anything but honest. They hit harder than Vivian's offer, harder than the salary or the benefits or the professional validation. His son thought he was a hero, not because he'd done anything extraordinary, but because he'd shown up every day and done what needed doing and refused to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had always been enough, and he just needed someone else to see it before he could believe it himself. The pizza arrived. They ate together at their small kitchen table, the apartment filled with the temporary wealth of excess food and carbonated drinks and the particular joy that comes from celebrating something earned against long odds. Isaiah talked about school, about the bearded dragon in his science class that had shed its skin that week, about the book report due Friday that he was nervous about. Normal kid concerns. Normal conversations that normal families had over normal dinners. Darius listened and responded and marveled at how something as simple as having dinner with his son at a reasonable hour felt like luxury after years of existing on opposite schedules. Later, after Isaiah was in bed and the apartment had settled into nighttime quiet, Darius sat at his desk with the laptop and sent an email to his custodial supervisor giving 2 weeks' notice. Professional, grateful, but firm. He'd finish his obligations, train whoever replaced him, leave the position properly. It was the right thing to do, even though part of him wanted to never set foot in Harrington Capital again until Monday morning when he'd walk in as someone different. But he'd promised Isaiah they'd do things right, and doing things right meant honoring commitments even when you were desperate to move on. The email sent, another door closing as a different one opened. Darius sat in the dark apartment staring at the screen reality settling into his bones like warmth after long cold. Monday. 5 days away. 5 days to prepare to adjust to believe that this was real and not some elaborate dream he'd wake from, to find himself still pushing a mop through marble hallways. But the note from Isaiah was real, crumpled purple crayon on notebook paper that said, "You're number one to me." The pizza boxes in the kitchen were real. The email in his sent folder was real. And somewhere on the 42nd floor of Harrington Capital, a CEO who'd remembered him from a single act of basic human kindness had decided that circumstances didn't define capability, that helping a child in crisis mattered more than an uninterrupted resume, that the measure of a person was what they did when no one was watching, and there was nothing to gain. Darius pulled up the job description one more time, read through the responsibilities and requirements with different eyes now. Not as someone hoping to be considered, but as someone who'd been chosen, as someone who'd walked away from rejection and been chased down by opportunity that refused to let him go. He thought about what Vivian had said. Show them that being told you don't belong is just someone else's opinion, not an actual limitation. 5 days until Monday. 5 days until he'd find out if belief could translate into performance, if 4 years of being invisible had erased his professional skills or just temporarily shelved them. 5 days until he'd walk into Harrington Capital through the front door in daylight and sit at a desk and do work that mattered. 5 days until everything changed. Monday morning, March 26th. Exactly 1 week after the interview that changed everything, arrived with the kind of crystalline October sunlight that made Chicago look like a city designed by optimists. Darius stood outside Harrington Capital at 8:43, 17 minutes early, for a 9 o'clock start time, wearing clothes he actually owned this time. Navy blazer purchased from a discount store on Saturday, grey slacks that fit properly, white shirt that wasn't borrowed from anyone. The outfit had consumed most of what remained in his bank account after rent, but it was his. An investment in looking like he belonged in the spaces he was about to occupy. The building looked different in daylight, always had. But this time the difference carried weight beyond aesthetics. He wasn't entering as the person who cleaned these floors. He was entering as someone who worked here officially, legitimately, with a desk and a title and expectations that had nothing to do with emptying trash cans. Marcus spotted him from the security desk, and his face split into a grin. There he is, moving up in the world. Good for you, man. Thanks. Still feels surreal. I bet. Hey, you'll need a new access badge. The custodial one won't work for your new clearances. Head to HR, they'll set you up. Different clearances? Different access? Different designation in the building's systems? Small details that added up to fundamental change in status. Darius thanked Marcus and moved toward the elevator bank, acutely aware of morning rush happening around him. Dozens of employees arriving for their day shifts, carrying coffee and briefcases, and the unconscious confidence of people who belonged. No one stared. No one seemed to register him as unusual or out of place. He was just another professional heading to another floor for another day of work. The anonymity felt both liberating and strange after 4 years of being either invisible or hyper-visible, depending on whether people remembered to notice the janitor. The elevator stopped on 18 first, letting off 6 people who dispersed toward their desks. Then 21, where Darius stepped off into the client relations department's morning routine. Conversations happening over cubicle walls, computers booting up, someone laughing at something on their phone, the ambient noise of a workplace coming online. Rebecca was at her desk near the windows, already deep into something on her monitor. She glanced up when Darius approached, and her smile looked genuine. Right on time. Good sign. She stood grabbing a folder thick with papers. Let's get you set up. Your desk is 3 rows back, window side. Not the best view, but definitely not the worst. Come on. She led him through the maze of cubicles and desks, nodding greetings to people they passed. Several faces turned to track them, curiosity obvious. The new guy. The one who'd gotten hired under dramatic circumstances that surely everyone had heard about by now. Office gossip moved at quantum speeds. His desk was standard corporate issue laminate surface ergonomic chair that had seen better days, 3 drawers, a computer that was booting up automatically. The window beyond offered a slice of Chicago skyline buildings stacked against morning blue. His nameplate hadn't arrived yet, just a temporary paper sign taped to the cubicle wall, Darius Kane, Senior Client Relations Manager. Seeing his name there did something complicated to his chest. Rebecca dropped the folder on his desk. New hire packet, insurance forms, direct deposit authorization, employee handbook, confidentiality agreements, basically everything that proves you're officially part of the machine now. She pointed to the computer. Your login credentials are in the welcome email I sent Friday. Password is temporary, you'll need to change it on first login. Once you're in, there's a training module queue that'll walk you through our client management system. Tedious, but necessary. How long does the training usually take? If you're conscientious, about 3 hours. If you're actually absorbing it, instead of just clicking through, maybe 4. Don't rush it. The system is our backbone, and you need to know it inside out. She checked her watch. I've got a 9:30 call, but I'm free at 11. Meet me then and I'll introduce you to the team properly, show you where everything is, answer the 1,000 questions you'll have by then. She left him there, and Darius sat down in the chair that was now his at the desk, that was now his, staring at the computer screen that was asking for credentials he now possessed. The finality of it hit in waves. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't borrowed. This was his actual job, the one he'd fought for and won against odds that should have crushed him. He logged in, changed his password to something Isaiah-related, but not obvious, and started working through the training modules. The client management system was sophisticated, more sophisticated than anything he'd used at Midwest Tel, but the underlying logic felt familiar. Track interactions, document concerns, flag priorities, maintain histories, so anyone on the team could pick up a client relationship and understand context immediately. Good design. Thoughtful architecture. The kind of system that suggested someone had actually thought about how humans worked instead of just what computers could do. 2 hours in, A man appeared at the edge of his cubicle. Early 40s, receding hairline tie loosened like it had been strangling him since 8 a.m. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were calculating. "You're the new guy. Kane, right?" "That's right. Trevor Hollis. Been here 6 years. Heard about your dramatic hiring process." He didn't make it sound like a compliment. "Word of advice, most of us earned our positions through normal channels. Interviews proving ourselves climbing the ladder. You're starting with a target on your back because of how you got here. Just so you know." Darius met his gaze steadily. "Noted. I'm not here to make enemies or step on anyone. Just here to do good work." "Good work." Trevor smiled without warmth. "We'll see. Mrs. Harrington's got blind spots like anyone else. Sometimes her personal feelings override good business sense. Hope you're worth the capital she spent on you." He walked away before Darius could respond, leaving behind the particular tension that came from knowing not everyone would be Rebecca's version of welcoming. Some people would see him as affirmative action, as special treatment, as someone who'd skipped the line they'd waited in. The fact that he'd spent 4 years mopping their floors wouldn't register. The fact that he was overqualified wouldn't matter. He'd gotten in through the wrong door, and that would colour everything until he proved otherwise. Darius returned to the training modules, but Trevor's words had lodged under his skin. He'd expected this, known it was coming. But knowing and experiencing were different countries, and he was currently navigating terrain that felt hostile in ways the custodial work never had. At least as a janitor, no one had questioned whether he deserved to push a mop. Now he'd have to justify his existence every day until people either accepted him or didn't. 11 o'clock came. Rebecca collected him for the team introduction, which happened in a conference room that felt too small for the 8 people crammed inside. She went around the table making introductions, names and faces that Darius tried to commit to memory. Trevor was there, emanating skepticism. A woman named Sandra, who barely looked up from her phone. 2 younger guys, Marcus and Devon, no relation to the security guard, who seemed more curious than hostile. An older woman, Patricia, who studied Darius with the assessing gaze of someone who'd been in corporate America long enough to have seen everything twice. Rebecca outlined his role, the kinds of clients he'd be handling, the team structure and collaboration expectations. Standard orientation material delivered professionally. But Darius could feel undercurrents, unspoken questions, the weight of being the person everyone was evaluating before he'd done anything worth evaluating. "Any questions for Darius?" Rebecca finished opening the floor. Patricia spoke first. "What's your background? Before here, I mean. What kind of customer service experience are we talking about?" A fair question delivered neutrally. Darius gave her the summary version: 8 years in telecommunications, his approach to client relations, the gap, and why it existed, his 4 years at Harrington in custodial while waiting for an opportunity to return to professional work. He kept it factual, didn't editorialize or apologize. Patricia nodded slowly. "Telecommunications is good training. High-stress environment, lots of conflict resolution. Should translate well to wealth management clients, though the stakes are different." "Higher stakes," Trevor interjected. "Our clients are managing 7- and 8-figure portfolios." "They're not calling about their cable bill. They expect expertise discretion results. The learning curve is steep." "I'm aware," Darius kept his voice level, "and I'm ready for it." The meeting wrapped shortly after. People dispersed back to their desks, and Darius returned to his training modules, aware that the team introduction had accomplished exactly what such things always accomplished, established that he existed, and now everyone could form opinions about whether that existence was positive or problematic. Lunch came. Darius ate a sandwich he'd packed at his desk, not ready to navigate the social complexities of the break room. He finished the training modules by 1:30, took the automated assessment that proved he'd actually absorbed the material, and passed with a score high enough that the system congratulated him. Then came the moment he'd been simultaneously anticipating and dreading, his first actual client assignment. Rebecca appeared with a file folder. "Got your first case. Eleanor Whitmore. 78-years-old widow, portfolio worth about $4 million, been with us for 6 years. She called this morning with concerns about a discrepancy in her last quarterly statement. Account shows a transaction she doesn't remember authorizing, about $127,000. Darius took the folder, scanning the client summary. "That's a significant amount to misplace." "It is. She's extremely sharp, not someone who forgets things. If she says she didn't authorize it, she probably didn't. But she's also—" Rebecca paused, choosing words carefully. "She's got a reputation. Very exacting. Very quick to escalate if she doesn't feel heard. 3 different associates have handled her account this year, and she's requested reassignment each time. She's basically our stress test for new hires." "You're giving me the difficult client on my first day." I'm giving you the client who will either confirm you're as good as I think you are or reveal weaknesses we need to address immediately. Better to know now than 6 months from now." Rebecca's expression was sympathetic but firm. "This job isn't about handling easy cases. It's about handling complicated people who have every right to be demanding because we're managing their life savings. Eleanor Whitmore is exactly the kind of client you need to prove yourself with." She left him with the file. Darius read through it completely. 6 years of interaction history notes from previous associates, patterns in her concerns and communication style. She was detailed, precise, expected thorough responses, and had low tolerance for deflection or excuse-making. The kind of client who'd spent a lifetime being dismissed because of her age and gender and had developed aggressive defenses against further dismissal. He could work with that, understood it even. Being underestimated built particular kinds of armor. Darius picked up his phone and dialed Eleanor Whitmore's number before he could second-guess himself. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the kind of authority that age and wealth and refusal to be ignored had forged. "Eleanor Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Darius Kane from Harrington Capital. I'm calling about the concern you raised this morning regarding your quarterly statement. Another new person. What happened to the last one?" "I'm not sure, ma'am. I just started today and your account was assigned to me. But I've reviewed your file thoroughly and I understand you've identified a transaction you don't recognize for $127,000. "That's correct. I'm meticulous about my finances, young man. I don't misplace six-figure transactions." "I believe you. Let me find out exactly what happened and call you back within 2 hours with a complete explanation and resolution plan." Silence stretched across the line. Darius could practically hear her recalibrating, adjusting her prepared arguments because he hadn't triggered them. 2 hours. 2 hours. If I can't have a complete answer by then, I'll call anyway and tell you exactly where things stand and when you'll have the full resolution. You won't be left wondering. Fine. But if you're just another corporate functionary trying to smooth this over without actually addressing it, you'll be the 4th person I've gone through this year. Understood. I'll call you back by 3:30. He ended the call and immediately pulled up the transaction detail in the client management system. The transfer had been authorized 6 weeks ago, moving funds from her main investment account to what appeared to be a separate holding account. The authorization showed her account number, the correct security codes, everything that should make it legitimate. Except Eleanor said she hadn't authorized it, and Darius had learned long ago that when someone was absolutely certain about their own actions, they were usually right. He dug deeper into the system, tracking backwards through the transaction chain. The authorization had come through the online portal, which Eleanor used regularly according to her interaction history. But the timestamp was odd, 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Darius checked her profile. She was 78. What were the odds she was doing 6-figure financial transactions at midnight? He pulled up the server logs. Thank God the training had covered this, and found the session information. The login had originated from an IP address in Naperville, Illinois. Eleanor's home address in the system showed Evanston. Different suburbs, different locations entirely. Someone had accessed her account from a location she didn't live in, at a time she probably wasn't awake, and moved a significant amount of money. Darius felt his pulse kick up. This wasn't a simple discrepancy. This was potentially fraud, or at minimum a serious security breach. He needed to escalate immediately, but he also needed to verify before triggering alarm bells that might be false. He called IT security, explained the situation. They pulled the logs cross-referenced against Eleanor's known devices and locations. The accessing device wasn't registered to her account. The IP address belonged to a Starbucks with public Wi-Fi. "Yeah, that's compromised," the IT guy confirmed. "Someone got her credentials and used them remotely. We'll need to freeze the account immediately, reverse the transaction if it hasn't been fully processed, and—" "Hold on," Darius interrupted. "Before we freeze anything, where did the money go? What's the destination account?" Typing sounds. "Looks like... It's another Harrington Capital account. Business investment account registered to..." More typing. "Whitmore Holdings LLC, same last name as your client. She has a business account. Apparently. But it's not linked to her personal profile in our system, which is weird. They should be cross-referenced if they're under the same beneficial owner." Darius's mind raced. Either Eleanor had a business account she'd forgotten about, unlikely given her meticulous nature, or someone had created a fraudulent account using her name to siphon money in a way that looked semi-legitimate on surface examination. "Can you see who set up the Whitmore Holdings account?" "Let me check." "Okay, it was opened 4 months ago. Authorization came through..." Long pause. "Through our commercial division. Signed off by Lawrence Whitfield." Everything went very still in Darius's head. Lawrence Whitfield, who'd tried to keep him from getting hired. Lawrence Whitfield, who ran HR but apparently also had authority to approve business accounts. Lawrence Whitfield, who now featured in a transaction chain that looked increasingly suspicious. "Don't freeze anything yet," Darius said carefully. "I need to make some calls first, but flag this in your system as potential fraud investigation. I'll escalate through proper channels." He hung up and sat staring at his monitor while his brain worked through implications. This was either an extraordinary coincidence or something much worse. And his first day, his very first actual case, had just become exponentially more complicated than anyone had planned. Rebecca was at her desk. Darius walked over, keeping his voice low. "The Eleanor Whitmore situation, it's not a simple discrepancy. I think we're looking at fraud, possibly internal." Her head snapped up. "What?" He explained quickly the unauthorized access, the suspicious transaction, the business account that shouldn't exist. Lawrence's name in the authorization chain. Rebecca's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something harder. "You need to take this to Vivian directly, not through normal channels. If Lawrence is involved, going through HR would be going directly to the CEO on my first day over something that might still have an innocent explanation. That's not going to make me popular. Neither is covering up potential fraud because you were worried about optics." Rebecca's voice was firm. "If you're right, this is serious. If you're wrong, better to be wrong loudly than silently ignore warning signs. Vivian will respect you for bringing it forward, even if it turns out to be nothing." Darius checked the time. 2:17. He'd promised Eleanor an answer by 3:30. Making this jump over everyone's heads, potentially accusing a VP of impropriety based on incomplete information, every instinct screamed that this was career suicide. But he'd told Eleanor Whitmore he'd find out what happened, and he'd tell her the truth. And if the truth was that someone at Harrington Capital was stealing from elderly clients, saying nothing would make him complicit. "How do I get a meeting with Vivian? Do I just call her office?" "I'll call. Tell her assistant it's urgent and client-related. That should get you in quickly." Rebecca picked up her phone, navigated through some internal directory, spoke briefly with someone. "Okay, she can see you at 2:45. That gives you 28 minutes. Go organize your evidence, take the file with you, and for God's sake be certain about your facts before you accuse anyone of anything." Darius returned to his desk, pulling together everything he'd found. Transaction logs, IP addresses, the business account details, the authorization chain. He printed key pages, highlighted relevant sections, organized it into a coherent narrative that wouldn't sound like paranoid speculation. By 2:40, he was riding the elevator to the 42nd floor with a folder clutched in hands that wanted to shake, but he wouldn't let them. The executive level was different from the floors below thicker carpet actual artwork, instead of corporate posters, the kind of quiet that came from soundproofing and distance from operational noise. Vivian's office was at the end of a hallway lined with windows. Her assistant, a woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who guarded access like it was both job and calling, looked up when he approached. "Mr. Kane, she's expecting you. You can go in." The office was expansive without being ostentatious. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing Chicago stretching to the horizon. A desk that looked more like furniture than office equipment. Bookshelves filled with actual books, plus industry awards arranged without fanfare. Vivian was standing by the window's phone to her ear, gesturing emphatically at someone who wasn't there. She ended the call when he entered. "Mr. Kane, Rebecca said it was urgent." "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for jumping the chain of command on my first day, but I've encountered something that I think needs your immediate attention." "I'm listening." He laid out everything he'd found, walking through the transaction chain step by step, pointing out the anomalies and red flags. Vivian listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for 30 seconds. That felt like 30 minutes. "You've been here for 6 hours." "Yes, ma'am." "And in those 6 hours handling your very first client case, you've uncovered what appears to be systematic fraud involving a senior member of my leadership team." "Potentially. I could be wrong about—" "You're not wrong." Her voice had gone cold. "I've had concerns about certain account irregularities for 2 months. Nothing I could prove, nothing concrete enough to justify investigation. But this—" She picked up the printouts he'd brought, studying them with laser focus. "This is concrete. This is actionable." She picked up her phone, dialed. "Dan, I need you in my office immediately. Bring everything we have on account security protocols and authorization chains for business account creation. No, right now. Because I think we have a much bigger problem than either of us wanted to admit." She hung up, then dialed again. "Lawrence, I need you in my office. I'm aware you're in a meeting. Pull yourself out of it. 10 minutes. The calls made, she turned back to Darius. "You understand that what you've brought me potentially ends someone's career and possibly puts them in legal jeopardy?" "Yes, ma'am. That's why I almost didn't come up here. But I promised Mrs. Whitmore I'd find out what happened to her money and tell her the truth. And the truth is, looking like someone at this company betrayed her trust. Someone in this company betrayed a lot more than one client's trust. Vivian's expression was granite. But you did the right thing bringing this to me. Uncomfortable, politically dangerous, career-threatening maybe, but right. That's the distinction between people who work here and people who belong here. Welcome to the second category. A man arrived first, Dan apparently, who turned out to be the chief risk officer. Darius repeated his findings. Dan's face progressed through shock to fury to grim determination. He confirmed that business accounts required VP-level approval, that Lawrence had authorized 17 such accounts in the past 6 months, and that if even a fraction of them followed the same pattern as Eleanor's situation, they were looking at systematic theft, potentially totaling millions. Lawrence arrived 12 minutes after being summoned, looking irritated until he saw Darius in Vivian's office. Then his expression went carefully neutral. You needed something. Sit down, Lawrence. The CEO's voice carried a tone that made Lawrence's eyes narrow, but he sat. Vivian laid out the evidence, not asking questions, just stating facts and watching his face. To his credit, Lawrence didn't try to deny anything immediately. He listened, calculated, then went for the deflection strategy. This is a misunderstanding. Those business accounts are legitimate. Then you'll have no problem providing documentation for their creation, beneficial ownership verification, and transaction authorization trails for every dollar moved through them. Dan interrupted. Because I'll be pulling all of that this afternoon, and if anything doesn't check out perfectly, we're having a very different conversation involving law enforcement. Lawrence's face had gone pale. Vivian, I've been with this company for 20 years. I know. Which makes this betrayal particularly devastating. She stood, and something in her posture made clear the meeting was over. You're suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you out. Dan will contact you through your attorney once we've completed our audit. If you're smart, you'll cooperate fully. If you're not, the consequences will be proportionally severe. She pressed a button on her desk phone. 2 security guards appeared, not markers from the lobby, but corporate security who looked like they'd done this particular duty before. Lawrence stood slowly, his world visibly collapsing around him. His eyes found Darius, and there was venom there. 6 hours. You've been here 6 hours, and you've destroyed. I've protected clients who trusted us with their money. Darius cut him off. That's my job. Sorry if it inconveniences your fraud operation. The guards escorted Lawrence out. The office fell silent except for city noise filtering through the windows. Dan excused himself to begin the audit, promising updates by end of business. Vivian sank into her chair, suddenly looking every bit of 48, plus the weight of discovering a 2-decade employee had been stealing. Mrs. Whitmore still needs to be called back, Darius said quietly. I promised her answers by 3:30. It's 3:12. Tell her the truth. Her money will be restored fully by tomorrow morning. The unauthorized account has been frozen. We're investigating the scope of the breach, and she'll be notified of every step. And tell her... Vivian paused. Tell her I'm personally appalled that this happened under my watch, and I'm ensuring it never happens again. Darius returned to his desk, aware that the entire floor had gone quiet in the way offices go quiet when dramatic events ripple through them. He dialed Eleanor's number, and when she answered, he told her everything. The fraud, the breach, the resolution, Vivian's personal apology. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. You actually found it. Found the truth, I mean. You didn't just tell me what was easy or convenient. I promised I would. Besides, you were right to be concerned. Turns out your instincts were exactly correct. Thank you, young man. Truly. I've been with Harrington for 6 years, and this is the first time someone actually listened instead of just trying to manage me. They wrapped up the call. Darius documented everything in the client management system, flagged the case as resolved with fraud investigation ongoing, and leaned back in his chair feeling simultaneously exhausted and wired. First day, 6 hours. He'd uncovered systematic fraud, triggered an executive suspension, and earned a reputation that would precede him into every future interaction at this company. Rebecca appeared at his desk. So, eventful first day. That's one word for it. The whole floor is talking. Half the people think you're a hero, the other half think you're a liability who'll get fired for making waves. She smiled. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly what this company needs. Someone who gives a damn about doing right instead of doing easy. Darius glanced at the clock. 4:20. He'd arranged with Mrs. Chen, their neighbor, who lived 6 blocks away, and sometimes watched Isaiah to pick him up from school today, since Darius wasn't sure how his first day would go. But guilt crawled up his spine anyway. You should go, Rebecca said, reading his expression accurately. "Tomorrow's soon enough to deal with fallout. Today you did good work. Go be with your son." He left, taking the elevator down through the building that knew him in a different capacity now. Marcus waved from security. A few people nodded as he passed. Word had definitely spread about whatever had happened on the 42nd floor. The October evening was cooling toward night. Darius walked to Mrs. Chen's building feeling like he'd lived 3 days instead of 1. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock her face arranged in a smile, and Isaiah appeared behind her with eyes huge with questions. Darius knelt down to his son's level. "First day was complicated, but I think it went well." They walked home together, the 6 blocks between Mrs. Chen's apartment and theirs, while Isaiah talked about school, and Darius tried to be present, even though his mind kept replaying the day's events. Dinner was simple. After Isaiah went to bed, Darius sat at his desk, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. Email from Vivian, time-stamped 8:47 p.m. "Mr. Kane, initial audit confirms fraud across 12 accounts totaling 3.7 M. Lawrence has been terminated and matter referred to federal investigators. Eleanor Whitmore specifically asked that I convey her thanks for your integrity. Several other affected clients are being contacted. You may be asked to testify if this goes to trial. Understand that you've made enemies today, people who benefited from Lawrence's operation or simply don't like boats being rocked. But you've also demonstrated exactly the kind of character this company needs. Thank you for choosing right over easy. VH." Darius read it twice, then closed his laptop and went to check on Isaiah one more time. His son was asleep, breathing easy, one hand curled under his pillow. 8 years old and already teaching his father lessons about courage and belief and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. But tonight he'd done work that mattered and helped people who needed helping. Tonight he could look at his sleeping son and know that when Isaiah eventually asked what his father did for a living, the answer would be something worth respect. Sometimes the measure of a person isn't whether they reach for opportunity when it's offered. Sometimes it's what they do with it once they have it, whether they protect themselves or protect what's right, whether they choose comfort or conscience. Darius had chosen. Whatever came next, he'd face it knowing he'd chosen correctly.